And then there's like this never changing misogynistic culture. And it makes you just want to opt out, you know? And that's dangerous for the industry. And that's dangerous also for society and culture. I'm Margaret Kelsey.
And I'm Devin Bramhall.
And this is Don't Say Content,
a show created in partnership with Share Your Genius. So one of the things I've seen, and I know I was this at times too, from women specifically, is they end up, once they realize they're stuck, it's like they end up playing into the victim mentality. And this is not a criticism actually at all. This is absolutely not a criticism. But they're like, well, I don't have control over that. I can't control this.
I think I understand what you're saying is that it's normal and human when you feel like you can't change something to forget that the only thing that you can change is yourself. And the answer might be that you have to make a hard decision and you have to leave and you have to find something better. And most people will stop themselves at that point of knowing that they have control and just be like, I don't have control. And it's okay to even do for a short period of time, right? Like everyone does it. It's a normal, I think, cycle of realizing that you don't have control or you don't have influence or you don't whatever. But you have to then get to the point where you realize that you do have control. You have control over yourself. Again, thinly veiled episode about relationships.
Yeah, that's it. And it's like, I wish I could tell all of these leaders how at risk their team is of leaving them. It's so obvious to the rest of us, and it's not obvious to them. And I actually believe now that not all of them realize that they are displaying misogynist behaviors, like, for example, different expectations for female and male leaders, right? Females are running all over the place to be thorough, to prove every tiny little thing and justify everything, show up in all the places. Like the bar is impossible. And then you see the guys and then, oh, they're like almost coming to the women to solve the men's problems because they're like, well, he can't do it. And it's like, I've had guys who don't show up to meetings. They show up unprepared and no one cares. Then after it's like, oh, well, so-and-so, woman, she wasn't perfect in this some other way, but she showed up in all the ways she was supposed to. She gets criticized. Well, it's like nothing said about the fact this guy shows up, has no ideas, didn't bring anything to the table. And it's like, hold on a second. Like there's other people here you need to hold accountable.
Talking about different expectations. So I've experienced that absolutely, where it felt like a team that I had built that was mostly women were solving a lot of problems and fixing a lot of mistakes that the broader team, who was mostly male, was doing. And it felt like we were moms, it felt like we were just cleaning up the toys. And then the other thing is I have another story of a time that I was working at a company, and I forget whether it was like a round of layoffs or if it was just eliminating this one person. But I had a male boss who had to fire a guy who had was the sole breadwinner for his family. His wife didn't work and they had a couple kids. And my boss was talking to me about how emotional it was making him and the fact that he got this guy a bigger severance package than was the protocol because the fact that he was a dad. And the only thing I could think about was like, what if it was a mom, right? Like, would you have fought for her to have that package? Maybe it was the sole breadwinner thing. And maybe if it was a mom and she was the sole breadwinner, he would have done that. But there's a piece of me that was really like troubled by that conversation where I was like, oh, so he got above the thing because you identified with him as a father that needed to take care of. And that idea of like, it is the men's responsibility to, earn the money. And I mean, we see this like nationally. There's statistics about the fact that men get a pay increase when they have children and women get a pay decrease when they become mothers. There's a motherhood penalty. And I think that that's stark, right? This idea that it's less advantageous financially to become a mother than it is to become a father. It's advantageous to become a father financially. It's very not advantageous to become a mother financially.
Okay, not exactly that story, but related was I've had my male bosses say to me, you have to make this guy work. Get him to do something. Like you cannot fire him. Like you need to make him work. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. I've seen much more of that of like, hey, this person's job role either got eliminated or we don't need them to do that. Let's find him a place And I don't necessarily see that often on the other side of like, we don't need her to do the job anymore. Let's just figure out some place that she can fit.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another thing that comes out a lot that I kinda love when it happens now because I can't wait to address it, but this still happens where you express an idea in a meeting and there's someone else, another guy who comes in and he says, "Well, the way it is blah, 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 and we should," and they just co-opt your idea and explain it back to you in such a way you're like, "It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable." It's like, "Well, here's what it really is. Here's what it is, and, we've got a da 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 and this and that," and then they're suddenly explaining, like, "Because this is how this thing works. It goes like this and this." I'm like, "I know how it works. I just told you how to make it better. I don't need your help here." It's like, what is it about the male-female dynamic? Are they threatened? There's gotta be something that's unconscious in there.
I think a lot of this is unconscious. Like even the content thing of seeing my own words on LinkedIn, I don't think it was purposeful of like, I now learned this thing from Margaret. I'm not going to credit her and I'm going to go talk about this publicly. I think it's like, oh, I learned something new and like, let me post about it. But what I think the entrenched misogyny is there's no social benefit of linking yourself to, and this is like broad strokes. I think there's no like credibility boost by being associated with a woman because there's still this hierarchical thought that men are superior. And so if you can tag and link the fact that you had this conversation with this very smart man, you're signaling a credibility boost. Again, I think this is very subconscious. I don't think that this is, I think even really smart men that are trying to do the work are still falling into this trap. But I don't think there's as much of a social boost of like, hey, I had a conversation with this super smart woman.
Yeah. This is also something you can like into a relationship. Like the number of times, my boyfriend and I be talking about something and then I'll say something and then a week later he's like, "I was reading this book and it said," I was like, "Oh, you mean exactly what I said last week? Cool. Thanks."
The thing I told you about. Maybe you read that book because you were interested after we had that conversation about that exact topic.
It's so funny. I mean, then it's kind of cheeky because obviously, like, I'm sure there's a version of that I do too. So in relationships, it's more funny. But I definitely felt this towards the end of last fall when I just felt like I was so invisible. It's like I was out in the world and I felt like no one could see me. There's always the people that do, that kind of follow you and look up to you and all of that. But it was like, why do I feel like I'm screaming into the void?
Yeah. Well, this is kind of tangential, but the way that you're talking about that was definitely my experience of motherhood too. And I keep having this like refrain pop back into my brain. It's this idea of like the words that keep coming to my mind is motherhood right now is so reductive. It's so reductive in terms of the ability to be a fully formed human being with activities and interests and a life outside of just that one piece of you of being a mother. And I see it everywhere, right? There's so much of like societal pressure to make that your identity, right? To be like put on your LinkedIn bio or your Instagram bio, like mom of blah, blah, blah. And I think it was an interesting identity shift because I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready to be like, oh, now all that you go to a party or something, and I had this experience where people would ask Ben, like, "Oh, like, what do you do for work?" And they wouldn't ask me. And I would be like, "I have a really fucking good career, really good job." They would be like, "How's Everett?" Like, "How's blah, blah, blah." And it's just so interesting to see the places that shows up too, of feeling invisible over all of the multifaceted personality traits that you have as a grown ass woman who happens to be a mother. And I see it again, there's so much societal pressure to do that, right? Like mommy blogs and mommy this and yada yada. But it's something that I've had an interesting time exploring of like how much of my own identity do I want being a mom? Meanwhile, my son's self-portrait is right back there. So
It's interesting because as my friends are starting to have kids over the past 5 years, that's been coming up more and more from all of them. Like, my friend Christina Carson posted on LinkedIn, I think it was about pumping at work, and it blew up on LinkedIn from all of these working women. And then Allie Tunnel, who used to work for me at Animals, she just started a podcast called Shifting Priorities, and it's all about that balance of, like, motherhood and your whole self, that you're the fact that you are still multifaceted as a mom.
It makes you more multifaceted, not less multifaceted, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's like, once you have a child, is like, what are your priorities? Like, maybe work's not doesn't fit in the same way as a priority, but it still is one, etcetera. So, I'm seeing some that come up more often. My friend who was in sales, and she'd just gotten this new job, and she got pregnant. They had just come off, like they were just like, "Okay, we're gonna stop trying."
Yeah, we're just gonna not try.
Yeah. Well, no, they were like, "We're not trying at all," because she was looking for a job. She was about to go into it or something, and then all of a sudden, one of the times took, and so she was like, "Shit, I didn't plan this." But then she's gotta worry about, "Well, is he gonna think that I."
In the interview process or didn't disclose, or do you even get sometimes you don't get maternity benefits until you've been at a company for a decent period of time. I had gotten a job offer and I looked in the fine print and it was you only got the 3 months or 2 months, I think, of maternity leave once you had been at the company for a year.
Yeah, it's the level of scrutiny, the level of having to prove yourself. It's like, no wonder we're all exhausted. So, we're recording on top of a recording.
Yeah, meta.
Meta. We started a recording to follow up on our misogyny episode from last season, and we just kind of dove into it, and we sent it off to Katie, our producer, and we said, "Just help."
Yeah.
Some
What are we doing here?
Yeah, because it felt like, I don't know, it didn't feel like had a thesis or like it was going anywhere.
Yeah,
So, we're here
to
because
try to make it go somewhere.
yeah. And we did. We got a chance to listen back and think on it. And there was one piece that was missing that came glaring out at me, which is sort of this idea is like going back to why we're talking about this in the first place. And oddly, I feel like that does get lost when having conversations about gender inequity, at least the ones that I have, because we're so focused on the way it shows up in specific situations or with specific people. And I feel like I forget sometimes to address why I'm addressing it, which is that it makes me feel bad about myself. Like, I frequently feel invisible and frustrated that I don't get credit for my own achievements. And I felt like we sort of owed it to everybody to like talk about this other side where it's like, we're talking about this for a reason and we're frustrated by it for a reason. It's because we're sick of feeling bad. Like, we're sad from it. Like, it's something that bleeds into the rest of my life that I have to manage all the time. So, yeah, Margaret, like, where are you at in that side of the convo?
I would add to it to say it can get to be so demoralizing that you want to opt out of the job, the career, the industry, right? And I think that that's what I'm hearing too is there's so many burnt out women specifically and mothers, but like inclusive of all women, whether they're mothers or not, that have been handling so much over the last couple years. And then there's like this never changing misogynistic culture, and it makes you just want to opt out, you know? And that's dangerous for the industry. And that's dangerous also for society and culture. I go back to this idea of like, I have this thesis of I think that we tend to build our family of origins again when we have families, become pregnant, get married, have kids. Like you can kind of live independently until you have a kid, right? Because like both people can be doing their own stuff. And then you have a kid. And what happens is, my theory at least, is that you build this dynamic that's the one that you were raised in. And it's not far enough away. Like how we were raised was not far enough away from like where we want to go. And so we almost pull it back to this like historical time frame. And I do see a lot of working, I'm going to say specifically now, like working mothers right now that are like, should I just quit my job and become a full-time mom because it'll be easier than dealing with everything and trying to be perfect all of the time and try to like do everything right? Like, would it be easier if I just took this career thing off my plate? And that to me is scary because I also think that then the next generation of both boys and girls are gonna be raised with this mindset of, like, that is necessary to do because it's too hard to quote unquote, like, have it all. It feels bad in the moment, but there's also a real risk for both the industries and also society as a whole if we don't fix this and women opt out, not out of like, I'm fully supportive of a woman making that decision because it's right for her. But if it's because like it's too hard to handle the stress of it all, that to me doesn't feel fair. If she would have kept her career if it hadn't been so stressful or so misogynistic or she felt more supportive. That to me feels unfair and something that we should try to fix.
Absolutely. I mean, can you imagine even in the short term, like an exodus of the workforce of all of this talent, what's left over just fills the hole. And that takes us back to where we were before, which was, this boys club.
I'm kinda seeing it happen too. I have, like, lots of anecdotal examples in my life right now of women being like, "I'm just gonna take a step back here. I'm gonna, like, give up my career that I've loved because it's so hard to do everything."
I don't blame them because I have seen this a number of times recently where like women that I are at work, I'm protecting privacy here, so I'm being very general. Women at work are judged on things that they don't necessarily know they're being judged about, and they're often emotions based and not strategy based. And I know that because I talk to both sides of the equation, right? So I talk to CEOs too. And I think one thing that I notice is just how emotional and qualitative their decision making is, not on purpose, even. This isn't like an intentional thing. And I'm like, well, have you ever told them about this expectation you have? Have you, asked about this thing? Have you transformed that into something specific that you can share with them to action on and give them a timeline? I feel like you and I especially get this behind the scenes view of what's going on and why women are held to this standard of perfectionism. It's because it truly is. The expectations on us are different because I hear like I am a part of those conversations, and the conversations about the male teammates are just never like that. There's a default to believe them. There's a default to defend them. I have to be the most careful when I'm giving feedback about other men on the teams of the companies I coach across all of them over time because they're extremely sensitive to feedback about their boys.
I wish that I had this link. I was just reading this article about a study that they did across both genders, all genders. I don't know if they did well, I don't know if this was just looked at like binary, like hetero or cis normative, like male and female behaviors, or if they included folks that express their gender differently. But it looked at both like male and female perception of employees. And so they gave like fake employee data to say, both of these 2 employees are, like, exceeding expectations and do really great work. This employee that's a man does it working 60 hours a week. This employee as a woman does it in 40. They asked, like, the participants to deliver, like, raises and bonuses, and most people rewarded the man doing the 60 hours a week, even though the performance review was the same. Because we tend to over-index on, like, hours worked instead of impact had. And the fact that the woman could do it in less time, but still have the same performance was seen as actually something to not reward. And so I also think about this again, going back to like families and working mothers, where it's like if the childcare isn't split equitably, if the at home dynamic and like the workings of the house and stuff isn't split up equitably, and she cannot work as many hours or can't overwork, she's going to get even more penalized, even though she's doing an amazing job, right? And so I think this layer of unconscious bias that we have about what good work looks like, what performance looks like. It's so rooted in misogyny. It's so rooted in the patriarchy. And like that is completely unfair to hold women to that standard, right? Even if you do a fantastic job and you're overperforming, if you can't performatively overperform by working more hours, you're not gonna get the raise and bonus.
Yeah. I think another thing on this that makes it hard for me to talk about this is there's, like, only so many times you're allowed to talk about it publicly. Like, you
Before you're labeled as, like, the ranty witch.
Yeah. And it's like, you and I, in both cases with these episodes, we, like, heavily reviewed them. Like, we put a lot more effort into reviewing, giving context, making sure whatever.
We can't just, like, flippantly speak off the cuff about it.
No, and I think as someone who has been labeled outspoken, I think I just speak. Like, I don't really think I've met outspoken people before. I just speak and I'm willing to share what's going on inside me, and I don't think it's that special, but I've been labeled as an outspoken person, whatever. So it makes me hesitant to wanna share experiences I have, even sometimes with my male friends, because 'cause I'm like, "Are they gonna eye roll again?" Like, and I'm not saying that I have friends who necessarily do that, but you do kind of feel like, have I overfilled my quota recently of complaints about the unfairness of still male-dominated work culture? And so then that only adds to that feeling of being invisible and feeling like nothing is ever gonna be easy for me. Like, no matter how much impact I've had on the industry, no matter how much I've succeeded for companies materially and with proof, it just feels like not only am I not recognized or valued for it, and I have to, like, fight pretty hard just to be recognized. I also feel like I can't talk about it too much because I'm gonna be seen as, like, a man hater, and I'm like, "I'm not." I'm mad at this system that still exists, and I'm mad that even some of the guys that are trying to change that system for the better for women and see it and see what's wrong with it, like, I don't think they're getting a lot of help either.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, like, even the quote unquote "good ones," right? There's an expiration or, like, a ticket system with them too, right? Like, they can't be the ones that are constantly talking about it or constantly and, like, it's a big enough issue that everyone should be talking about it constantly, right? And I think that's the self-perpetuating bit about it is, like, if you can't even point out that the system's broken and you get dinged when you do, the system self-perpetuates by staying the same. So it's like a protection mechanism of the system to then label anyone that's criticizing it as too much or too loud or unappreciative or whatever else gets thrown at you because that's how the system maintains itself.
Yeah. And I even have to be careful on a consulting standpoint, though this exists outside of consulting as well, where if I'm seen to favor a woman on the team too much, then they don't trust me. If I don't couch that in some kind of like qualifier context or like, I don't know, like I'm open, whatever, then they're like, they trust me less. And I need them to trust me in order to make change. There's so much delicacy, like tiptoeing. It's like people think that women are emotional, and I'm like, men are some of the most emotional workers and leaders I have ever met. I have to tread 800 times more lightly with men than I do women, which is fine. But like, if we could just bring that out in the open and say, okay, most men are really sensitive, and the way that comes out is through aggression. And so you need to be more careful with the way you communicate with them to make them feel safe and be open to having a discussion or negotiation. Actually, forget gender, just like look at individuals individually. But if we could just bring that out in the open, in any way, I feel like the conversation could shift a little bit from like men versus women to just acknowledging that men have never had the space to have emotions in a productive manner, nor were they taught it. And the world still doesn't support them being vulnerable, even though it's changed some. And so we need to be supporting them. And if that as a cultural thing was out there, imagine what it would do.
Did I in the other recording, did I mention the book For the Love of Men by Liz Plank?
You did.
It's so good. And then the other thing that you reminded me of was this quote from Meryl Streep. She was talking about how women have studied and learned the language of like men.
Mm.
And I think that's the interesting thing. Like this podcast is about, don't say content, like say what you mean. Let's be very clear and precise with our language. And I think that's the thing holding us back too, is that men have not learned the language of women, but women are bending ourselves in pretzels to use like the language of men.
One thing that similar to that that I've experienced is learning the language of men didn't really help me that much because when I act the way when I exhibit the same forthrightness and I don't even know the words to use, like, I'm not aggressive, but I'm, like, determined or, if I'm too confident or whatever, it's like I'll get dinged on that. Like, I've been told things like, "You're mean." I've been called these things where I'm like, "I think I'm just telling you the truth." Like,
I think I'm just being as direct as everyone else in this room that happens to be a man.
yeah. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Did I call you a chicken with your head cut off in a meeting as the leader, not just of you, but of this company?" Like, "No, I didn't do that." Like, you can do, like, one thing that is, like, professional and executed well, and it's like, "Oh my god, Devon's blowing up." And I'm like, "Just what?" And then you feel even more crazy because you're like, okay, it's like more and more traps put on you that put you in a smaller and smaller space where you're like, "Can I be at all? Like, can I exist without someone micromanaging everything?" And then, like, for someone like me who's been, has had strong career aspirations, I get mad sometimes when I hear stories of like, my boyfriend will talk about people that gave him chances or introduced him to these people. And I'm like, I need you to know that, like, I don't get that. I still have to fight for everything. And things don't get handed to me. They still don't. They never, like, I have to still work for everything. I have to ask. And it's just like, I wish there was a way to like rent that feeling for 5 minutes to other people so they know, like, I'm not being an asshole. I'm tired and a little bit, like, burned out and sad because I just wanna keep doing the career stuff. I wanna have more interesting problems to solve than yet another communication breakdown that's based on the fact that I dared to say what I thought. And this is why I hate being called outspoken, because I'm not outspoken. I'm just saying real life out loud. But because it's me, it's like, "Oh, wow, she's a real bull." And I'm like, "No."
I think being constantly policed for how you show up in the world is exhausting. And I think that's what we're talking about, right? It's like you can't just sit and be. You can't just like not think about it. And so we end up being in an absolute anxiety loop for most of our days to be like, was I too much? Did I do that? Am I going to get in trouble for that? Would that be perceived weird? How do I show up and let people know that I exist in this world in this way, but not get dinged and not, like this idea of other people, the real risks that come from other people thinking things about you that are untrue is exhausting.
It's so exhausting. And that goes back to that feeling demoralized.
Yeah. Here,
Um,
this is the Meryl Streep quote. So this is quoted off of something off of Instagram too. So if this isn't the actual quote, I'm sorry, but I don't want to play the video. She said, "It's like women have learned the language of men, have lived in the house of men all of their lives. We can speak it. You know how when you learn a language, like you learn French or Spanish, it isn't your language until you dream in it. The only way to dream in it is to speak it."
my coach always used to tell me if I was working through something and I was really upset, the first question she'd ask me is, "What would you like?" So I wanted to spend a little time on like stories of like good experiences I've had with male leaders because I've had a lot. But first, I've been rewatching Succession with my boyfriend who's never seen it before. And we watched the season finale last night. And he's like, "Oh, wouldn't it be funny if Tom and Greg ended up, like, being the 2 guys, like, leading the entire company or whatever?" This was before, obviously, the ending. And I was like, "You know what? They couldn't do that because it's too obvious. Because that's what happens already. 2 bumbling idiots come through, and everyone's like, 'They should run a company.'" So, like, do you have any examples of experiences with, like, male bosses or you're struggling with this?
You go first.
Oh my god. So, Brian Carr. was the VP of marketing at SpringPad when I was there, and it was an all-female marketing team. I wasn't on it to begin with. I was on the customer support side at first, but he was such a champion for the women on his team, and not in a way that felt like he was being generous to us in any kind of special way. He didn't do it in that way where it's like, "Look, I'm being a good guy." He just did what I would say is the job of a leader, but you could really see that he was going out of his way to empower us, like, make us the heroes of our own story, taking a back seat and, like, being the behind the scenes supportive leader and giving us credit for everything proactively. And I went to him when I was trying to move roles into marketing, and he helped me with that as well. My first big career move that launched my marketing career. And he's still that way. Like, he's still to this day, like, comment on things on LinkedIn, share stuff that I'm doing. Like, he's such an amazing supportive guy, and I think him like Sunit. Sunit was like that at Help Scout. Exactly the same. Actually, they are, like, very similar in the way they operate, and I think especially on that team where I needed a lot more air cover, as Sunit would say, because of my relationship with the CEO. Like, he was skeptical bringing me in the first place, and I kinda, like, only briefly got out from under that. Those were 2 really meaningful career moments for me where I was able to grow in my leadership capabilities, which then helped me go on. I went to animals after that. Wait, can I say David Zaker too? Because he was at Shareaholic, and he similarly treated me like I wanted to be in this manager role, and he treated me that way, and he supported me, he believed in me. He was another one that I thought, they're these, like, invisible heroes, because they just do the work, and they're not looking for recognition. Actually, I have to put Alex in this category too, because I told him recently, I was like, "You are actually a legit feminist, because the things you find attractive about me are things like," he likes that I have a life, and he finds it, like, attractive
Yeah.
that I'm, like, a busy
That you're
person.
not, like, obsessively doing whatever he wants. Yeah.
No, and I was like, "I think you're the original feminist?" Like, the quite literally, the reason one of the many reasons that he likes me, that was he was first attracted to and, like, values so much still, is that I'm a fucking badass career woman, and I was like, "I've been waiting for that forever." Because I remember I was dating this guy. We'd gone on, like, a few dates, and we talked on the phone a lot. He was, like, really into me, like, nice, right? Like, he was there and present, and that was around the time that Walter let us know, that I would be CEO, and so I told him about it, and he's like, "Yeah, like, I love strong women, da, 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 da." And then I was like, "Oh, sweet." He's like, "We'll go celebrate," and, because we had a date scheduled. And I remember he was, like, an hour late, didn't call me to tell me why. Then he was like, "Oh, I'm at work still." All of a sudden, he went from this, like, communicative, awesome guy to quite literally, like, leaving me hanging on the side of the street. Then we met up for dinner. I don't know why I waited for him that day. And then we went to this restaurant, and he just started, like, making fun of me whole time. And I was like, "This doesn't feel good," you know?
I think that humor when you feel bad to, like, give that hierarchical thing, that to me is something that I am so sensitive to now. Like, I feel like I used to miss it or be like, "Oh, they're just, like, joking around, like, being silly." Now it's, like, the biggest immediate red flag of you cannot, quote, unquote, "joke around" to put, like, I don't know, put in hierarchy. I don't know what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Like, when it's a joke to, like, put somebody down so that you can feel superior, that to me is there's nothing funny about that.
That literally happened to me last week at a bar. I might have already told this story, so stop me if I have, but it was like a Tuesday night. I was with Alex. We went to dinner at this like sports bar. It was a quiet night. We just love going there. And one of the bartenders, like, I guess also leads their trivia night. The trivia night was just about this one New York team. I don't even remember the sport. I think it was hockey actually, and he's like, "You wanna play? You wanna play?" We were both like, "We don't know anything about hockey." He's like, "It doesn't matter. You don't have to know hockey to play it." And we're like, "Okay." Literally every question was specifically about this one hockey team in New York and their manager. And there's this one question he asked where it was like, what happened between the owner of this hockey team and this other guy he hired who was accused of multiple instances of sexual harassment? What ended up happening to that guy? And he just kept asking it over and over again. And I don't know why I got really like uncomfortable. Finally, I was like, this is a stupid question. Why do you have to ask that question? He's like, oh, you think it's a stupid question? Broadcasted me to the entire bar, kept making fun of me in play and going on making the entire bar laugh at me. I, to be quite honest, have evolved to a point where I quite literally was not embarrassed at all, and I can't believe it. That would have mortified me, but, like, I think cancer really was like, "Listen, girl, you got bigger fish to fry." So anyway, at that point, I'm like, "I'm done." I look at Alex and I'm like, "I'm not." But then this is what they do too. He tried to rope me into talking to him. So he came back behind the bar and he is like trying to say something to me. And I just ignored him. Like I was just looking at my phone. I was like, I need to get the fuck out of here. And he tried again. And then it turns out that he wanted to show me that the story was okay, that I would be happy with the ending. And he was like, oh, the guy he was given a role with, like, some title to it that kinda called him out as, like, a sexual harasser. I forget what the title was, and I was like, "But they still hired him." And he was like, "Yeah, but they
I
gave him this name." I was like, "But the" he honestly did not understand what I was saying. I looked in his eyes, and he was lost. All I said was, "I hate this question." I didn't say it's a stupid question. I said, "I hate this question." Because he just kept, like you have to, like, keep repeating it over and over, and it's like, "This guy who sexually harassed multiple women, da da what happened to the guy who sexually harassed" and I'm just sitting here, I'm like, "It's fucking Tuesday. I wanna eat dinner and relax, and I want you to stop screaming about sexual harassment, please."
Yeah, stop yelling at me sexual harassment because it means something. I think that's the thing too. It means something visceral to you. It's happened to the majority of women, right? And like I actually don't know the specifics of your story, but I just assumed probably because we're both sitting here that like we've both been sexually harassed at some point in time, right? Like and I think that's the thing, right? Is like how many men have experienced sexual harassment? There are men that have, right? And it is real, but the proportions aren't the same. And so him yelling that in the room, you're like, I literally now are thinking, I'm thinking about being sexually harassed, about like the memory of it, about like, oh, I need to be more vigilant about not getting sexually harassed. No.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm not the kind of person that I make a very conscious decision day to day to focus on the things that are in my control. And I want to feel good. And so I focus on feeling good, which has made me very good at compartmentalizing because I also go to therapy for most of my life. I've had coaches, all this stuff. So, like, I have a very strong emotional support network, which means that I can have conversations about that separately and not bring it into my day to day life. I can just hear it. You know, you can hear it. Oh, she's so sensitive. Oh, why can't she take a joke? 'Cause it's just honestly, it's just not funny. Like, say something better. Come up like, why would you oh my god. Anyway, so, yes, definitely experienced the backhanded jokester,
To try to put to try to put a hierarchy in place. The whole purpose is to get you beneath and for them to feel superior.
and we feel like here's the thing, I do feel beneath. I do feel as someone who has, like, fought a lot and stood up for like, I will fight. I will get in a fight with you no matter if it's convenient or not, right? And at the same time, it's never enough. It doesn't actually end up curing anything in me. I still feel the same way. I just sometimes put a little more effort into dealing with it in the moment. I feel bummed out that I haven't gotten the opportunity to tackle harder problems in my career and that I'm not invited to the same rooms because I get bored so easily.
Yeah, you're like, use my brain for this, please.
Yeah, like can
Like I'm getting
someone
bored over here.
yeah, like can you finally ask me an interesting question? And I think that was one of the things I loved about working for Walter is like he didn't let us get away with anything. Like, not for nothing, but there were a bunch of years where, like, I really benefited from that. It was just like, "Answer to it," and I'm like, "Yeah," and I learned a lot, and it was exciting. I think, I try to separate, like, the good from the bad, right? And it's like, there was a lot of good there where I was held to account in ways I never had been before. And I was scared in a fun way for the first time
Yeah.
in a while.
I think those are all my stories around male leaders are that mixed bag of some good stuff, some not. And so I can't like it was really hard for me to like not be able to categorically be like, that was a good one. That wasn't performative. That wasn't bullshit. That wasn't telling me one thing and then doing something else. Like I have had great experience with male leaders, but overall it has been a mixed bag. And so it's hard for me to be like categorically across the board. And that's tough. I didn't even really think about that until you asked that question.
Okay, y'all, that's a wrap. Thank you, as always, for listening.
We'll be back next week. And just remember, you're doing great. You're doing great.
30% of you are doing great. The rest, you got to get your shit together. Come on.
You know which side you're on this week.
You know.
You know. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.